Hello, Freedom Fighters. My name is Stacey from Positive Property. We have Henry and Dan with us tonight. If you're watching us live, type in #live. If you're watching the replay, type in replay. Welcome, Dan and Henry. Now,
G'day,
Dan and
how are we,
Henry,
Stacey? Hey, Henry.
if you'd like to introduce yourself, you're obviously part of our circle of safety and working with our members one-on-one with their conveyancing. So we're getting a few lives come through, so everybody is ready and live. So let's get started. So tonight we're talking about the 10 things you need for the best property conveyances. Now, I did have a few dot points, but if you guys wanted to introduce yourself and get started, that would be fantastic.
Absolutely. So probably what we'll do tonight is, because we've got the public event and we've got the private event after this with a bit more detail, a bit more information. So what we're thinking about doing is starting with a bit of a general thing. We'll go into a bit more detail in the private section where we've got a little bit more time. So just to give us a general overview of who we are and what we do. My name's Henry Lloyd Davis, and I'm a tax lawyer. I'm based in Adelaide here. And I'm the principal of Australia Conveyancing. So Australia Conveyancing was set up so that we could offer a national service for conveyancing rather than having to go to a different conveyancer in every single state. And that's probably our main point of difference. We also, a lot of conveyancers aren't lawyers. And so I'm a specialist tax lawyer and I have my own operating firm as well. And I really wanted to see a higher level of service to be involved in conveyancing as well. Dan's on our team here at Australia Conveyancing. He's one of our lead conveyancers, and we'll probably be speaking with Dan or Matt in one of your files if you choose to do your conveyancing with us. So what I might do is, that's a bit about Australia Conveyancing. We'll go into a bit more detail shortly, but I thought I might give you a bit of a background about me and kind of my story as well and how I came to be here. So I grew up in Canberra. I went to a full immersion French school where the teachers were incredibly difficult, and a couple of them had to get deported because they were so outrageous, particularly students. So I grew up in an environment that absolutely necessitated grit. And because I was an Australian kid in a French school, they actually tried to get me out. So I learned a lot of ways. I learned a lot about rules and processes in that period of time. And I also...
Are you fluent French?
Yeah, I am. Je parle français. Je suis 33 ans. J'ai étudié au lycée franco-australien de Canberra. And I can also say...
Awesome.
Keep
going.
Yeah. And so if you need to learn a French phrase, I would absolutely recommend you learn the phrase Le cacahuète est dans l'ombril de l'ornithorynque.
Henry, what is positive property in French?
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Well.
Positive property. It's a property which is positive. So, and so the phrase I was saying means the peanut is in the belly button of the platypus. So happy to take some time out of my day to teach you how to do that. But when I was 18, I joined the Air Force and I was a radar operator and I was on the APC-3 Orion aircraft as an electronic warfare operator as well. And we did sonar. So I used to hunt submarines for the Air Force. I got airsick. And so decided to become a tax lawyer instead, which was obviously the next choice. I wanted to make sure
they just follow on together. Same, right?
Yeah. I wanted to use all the skills I'd learned in the Air Force hunting submarines to then apply that. So tax law was obviously, you can guess why I did that. And I've about 2 years ago, I set up my own tax law firm. I'm also building I suppose I'm the chairman of a property trust here in Adelaide, which is building our first skyscraper. So it'll be a 183-meter tall tower with a public viewing platform, a 240-key hotel, and a MOSA. Hopefully, the government will come on board with that project, which would be Adelaide Museum of South Australian History, and that would incorporate a history museum into Adelaide. If you Google me, you'll also find that I'm currently fighting with the Lord Mayor of Adelaide on a couple of different points. But I assure you we're all good friends, and I'm on Adelaide City Council as well. So after starting my law firm, so I did that for, I was a practicing solicitor in some other law firms, and I really wanted to go out on my own to give a much fuller experience for my clients. I've got a team in my law firm, about 5 I really saw, so my clients were property developers and accountants primarily. That's who I was primarily working for. I didn't often work with investors into the property market because they simply just couldn't afford the structuring advice that would come with these types of investments. So being a tax lawyer, I was always involved in property, particularly from the development side of things. And I actually got to know George here in Adelaide. He's a very prominent figure here in Adelaide. And we had a chat about some of the things that were really missing in property in this space as well, and how I could potentially do more to improve, I suppose, and use some of my expert tax advice in a more general sense and open that up to a wider class. So what we're looking at, like my preferred client is investors looking to invest in multiple states and have multiple properties. And that's what Australia Conveyancing really
That's us.
is in.
That's
Yeah.
us. That's the members. And Daniel, what about yourself? So what do you do in the business?
So I guess my background, I'm not as multi-dimensional as Henry. However, there are some distinct similarities. I went to a German school. It wasn't a French school when I was younger. So my lineage is rooted within the Barossa Valley in
Are you
South
going to give us a
Australia.
sentence now?
No.
Good.
No.
Nine.
Unfortunately,
I think nine.
that many years ago. That said, there was a story where about 15 years ago, I was holidaying in Europe and I was in a covered market in Poland, and I was trying to negotiate and barter over what he was selling, which was knockoff perfumes. And I found myself being able to speak quite fluently in German with him to get the discount. And it was through no recollection. It just actually magically happened. So learning a language is a very fundamental, rooted in your DNA kind of thing to pick up, I find. So if there's anyone out there who speaks multiple languages or is aspiring to, highly recommend it. It's a skill that, like a bicycle, once you get back on, you'll pick it up without even trying.
Perfect.
But the other interesting coincidence with Henry is I'm also from the Air Force as well. So
well,
they
maybe that is a roll-on career then.
absolutely. And in fact, we were based at the same place at the same time, but just never ran into each other. So whilst Henry was at 292 and learning to fly in the Orions, I was over at 92 Wing headquarters working in operations. So we were probably, what, Henry, 350 meters
Stones
apart at
throw.
any one time. And
I mean, I was in the
send you in strange
sergeant's mess.
places.
So I was in the fancy schmancy silver dining area.
Oh, okay. Well, you're a bit poshy, huh? All right, well, let's get to it. We're going to go through a few things that obviously people are wanting to know in terms of conveyancing. Anyone can feel free to put your questions in the sidebar or in the chat. But what do conveyancers do? Just give us that in a short, hey, what do you do?
The most important thing we do is sort of concierge the purchasers or the vendors experience from the point where they decide to commit and they are contractually obliged to purchase or sell, and just holding their hands and making sure that we're shepherding the transaction through to successful settlement. That's really the area that we play in. So whilst there are many people that are involved in the property purchasing process, often the conveyancer is the one that gets involved in the highest risk part of the process right at the end. It's more than just a simple administrative or clerical role. Is often an advisory role, and you have to be very careful, and we'll get onto this at some stage tonight as well, is you need to be very precise and particular about what type of conveyancer you're selecting, and then come to the decision with a criteria in mind. You want someone and something that's holistic, that's experienced, but is also multidimensional, and then is able to provide a safety net for the transaction in the event that something does and can go wrong.
You do put a lot of trust in them. I know that a lot of people do not read the fine print that they probably should. And so they're expecting that, hey, you're going to do your job to the best of your ability and cover us, basically.
Yeah.
Make sure we're okay.
Yeah. And more often than not, it's difficult to find a proactive conveyancer. And that's generally, it's no fault of their own. It might be the fact that they are new to the role. It might be that they're very busy. It might be that they're focused on other aspects of their business and don't have a client-centric view of things. It's probably the most exciting and motivating part of working in Australia conveyancing is that we focus on a small number of high yield customers and communities like Positive Property, where we can actually build a very close rapport and be very proactive in what we do and offer to the clients that is above and beyond what a typical conveyancer would do for a purchaser.
Absolutely. So how much does a conveyancer cost? The big question. They're going to vary a lot in price, I'm guessing, depending on what conveyancer you pick and what they do.
So I think probably that's a good question for me to take. So you might have seen, and I'll probably give you the example with wills, all right? Wills and estates. So you can go to the post office and you get a $5 will kit. And that will cost you $5 and you can have your will sorted and peace of mind all sorted out. The lawyers love will kits. They really, really encourage you to fill them out because the cost of administering your estate at the end of that is absolutely outrageous, because generally the way that it's drafted doesn't successfully leave the property where it's supposed to go. It's often litigated and it becomes extremely expensive. And that's where lawyers really make all their money, which is when they do your probate. So your probate is that kind of second thing, right? So you can get a will kit, for example, for $5. You'll also see this race to the bottom with a lot of firms. They'll be offering you with a fixed fee will for, say, $200, for example. Now, I know to actually do a will properly costs you a minimum $1,500, even to $2,000 or more, to actually figure out what's supposed to happen. Now, we've kind of seen this race as well to the bottom in conveyancing, and I've seen a lot of the times I've seen advertisements out there for $800, and I'm like, Jesus, that's well below what we offer, and that's what we charge. So the thing is that a lot of those costs aren't factored in, and sometimes whilst the job might technically get done, like if you buy a will kit, you will have a will at the end of it. Does it stand up? Does it prevent you from anything going wrong? Well, not so much. So at Australia Conveyancing, what we make sure, and different transactions cost different amounts in terms of, say, if you're putting a caveat or a mortgage or a standard conveyance, we charge depending on your complexity and what's going on the back of it. So you probably expect a conveyance, depending on the state as well, has variables as well. So Queensland, for example, you should add another $2,000-$3,000 to a basic charge just because of the way that they do it, and only lawyers do conveyances in Queensland. So a typical conveyancer will cost, I've seen it online for as low as $800. That's your bargain basement, bottom of the cheapest thing you can get, and it could go up to $2,500, depending on the complexity of your file. And we normally charge in that range somewhere, but really depending on what's involved. So is it subject to finance? Is it unconditional? We make sure that we go through your contracts and your building contracts, and we actually provide you advice on that and take over negotiation as well. So we look at your file and we give you a price based on what it is. But bargain basement, $800. Want it done like premium service, probably about $2,500. And
you kind of get what you pay for, right? It's the same with everything in life.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can get it cheap for sure, or you can get it done. You can spend a little bit more and potentially save a lot on the other end.
Yeah, exactly. So we've got another question pop up here. Are you liable?
So in terms of liability, to be accredited as a conveyancer or to practice as a solicitor, you need to be licensed to do so. So carry a conveyancing certificate if you are a conveyancer, or have your practicing certificate if you're a lawyer. To obtain those two things, you must carry what's called the scheme insurance, so the PI scheme for that particular insurance. So for a law firm incorporated in a particular state, they'll have a scheme. And to be a part of that scheme, you have to sign up for it up front, and then you get given your practicing certificate, amongst other things. So you're not able to practice unless you are appropriately covered under PI. From a conveyancing point of view, they also have an industry scheme, which is negotiated and run by the state associations. So anyone who you engage, I guess the big question is, can I see evidence of your ability to practice? Tick. If that is the case and they do have a license, then CBS or whoever governs that on a state-by-state level, or if it's the society, they would have ensured that you're signed up under the PI scheme for that particular state. So I guess the big question there is, if you do go and try and search for your own conveyancer, that does come with risk because you're unsure. If you go with Australia Conveyancing, you're guaranteed because it has access to its own PI insurance through the Law Society of South Australia, but then also leverages some professional services from a company that also holds a conveyancing license here as well.
How do you find a conveyancer? You Google?
Yeah.
You could Google.
Yeah.
Honestly, I've been involved in and around the industry for some time. I honestly believe that the best way to find a conveyancer is it will find you. Depending on your particular circumstance, it will either come heavily recommended by word of mouth for someone that has used the service before, or if you're using something like a Positive Property, something that maintains its own circle of safety, with an inner group of people that work collaboratively together and creates transparency and holds each other accountable for the outcome of the customer, that's the service that you go with.
And will you be there on settlement day?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It's a bit of history, I suppose. It used to be. There's a guy called. We have a suburb.
Hang on, you did this last time. I was here.
You weren't here last time. I'm a real stickler for history.
Okay. Yeah, go with it.
Long story short is they used to do it by paper. You used to have to go into the land titles office. Before that, before Torrens came about, this Torrens title system actually originated here in South Australia. And he came up with the idea of saying, well, you actually used to have a piece of paper that said, I own this property. And if you had that piece of paper, it was yours. If you didn't have that piece of paper, you didn't own the property. So if you got mugged, you suddenly lost all of your, you lost your entire property. So the way that it used to work was then you have a lands title. So the lands title officers kept records of who owned what everywhere. I actually had a case where there was a bit of land that actually wasn't converted into the new Torrens title system. And we basically had to claim that we were squatting. And there was a legitimate client, they ran a business, and it was a printing business, and they had to claim squatters' rights over this property and say, we've excluded the rest of the public. That they said that we kicked everybody off our land and we owned it, right? That was really interesting. You don't do that anymore. So it used to be the case where you would go down to the land title registry with a piece of paper, you'd sign the documents across, and they would update the records. Now we have this amazing thing called PEXA. And PEXA is something that Dan is quite the expert in. And he, in fact, really contributed to its construction. So, and Daniel, what is PEXA?
So PEXA is, it's been around since about 2010, Property Exchange Australia. It's effectively digitized the property settlement process. So as Henry was saying, you used to lean on parchments and bank checks. Now everything is done online. True, I was part of PEXA. In fact, I was a senior manager in their customer team for 6 years between 2016 and 2022 before leaving to work back in the industry as a customer of PEXA. PEXA is quite a revolutionary transformation, probably the most transformative thing to happen within conveyancing or even property law since about 1855 with the implementation of the Torrens titling system. It's the only system in the world that can do what it does, which is lodgement of financial documents and full financial settlement. Now, across the country, I think it's about 85% of all transactions are now facilitated through the platform. The team that work for Henry, we all have a rich experience as being part of that customer team. So we've been in the trenches. We've done the transformation from 0% through to here in South Australia, which I think is 99.8% of all documents lodged at the registry are done in PEXA. So fascinating piece of kit. Wonderful transformation, and yeah, everything is facilitated now through the digital platform PEXA, including something that you should be looking for in your conveyancer. I know we're going to get to the 10 things you need to look for. One of those things is making sure that they're cyber aware and using the right technology to facilitate and improve the process and make it more safe. And part of that is definitely settling in PEXA. And then also, aside from that, is the utilization of something called PEXA Key, which is the only thing that we use to communicate account details with the customer with.
And can you check on your own titles through PEXA?
No, unfortunately, Joe Public is not able to. You could go direct to the land registry in each of your states and call up copies of your duplicate titles or title searches to see that you're registered. But because of very intentional design, PEXA is only accessible by banks, lawyers, and conveyancers.
Yeah, it's very tight-knit circle that can access PEXA. But for example, every state titling office will have a website that you can go on, check your title, make sure there's no caveats on there, for example. Maybe your ex-girlfriend's caveated your house for some reason. So something we also deal with on a regular basis.
Okay, we've got one more question, and then we'd better run off to the members one. So, is PEXA just a financial instrument?
No, so it does handle the financial settlement. So it does disperse everything at settlement rather than checks. It will send it via RTT or make payments for utilities via BPay. But in the main, it's a networking tool. So it connects and integrates with every land registry, stamp duties office, over 12,000 lawyers and conveyancers across the country, and 152 financial institutions. What it also does through that integration is allows for you to make lodgement of documents at the LTO. So it's an all-in-one settlement platform.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Henry and Dan.
Thank you, Stacey, and thank you to the audience.
Thank you to all our freedom fighters out there, and thanks for being part of this. We love the little comments coming in. It really helps us when we get a bit of interaction. So if there's any other questions for the members, go along to the SHERP. That's happening right now. So we're going to go out of this one and straight into that one. So I'm going to leave you guys to it. Let's jump into the SHERP.
Let's do it.
Thank you, everyone.